welcome to the 2-minute warning interview series where we're going to take a detailed, if rapid, dive into what is happening and perhaps what should be happening in the global energy transition, especially in the Middle East. My name is 𝗂𝗶𝗿. I am the Director of the Energy Transition Dialogues at Gulf Intelligence, and I am delighted to say that with me today is 𝗖𝗶𝗿𝗰𝗂𝗍𝗂. She is the Chief Sustainability Officer covering Africa, Middle East and Asia at Energy. It's a huge area to be covering, 𝗖𝗶𝗿. I imagine you're kept very busy.
Well, thank you firstly for having me on. Yes, definitely a battle in terms of geographical scope, especially around COVID and the COVID restrictions. But with great ambassadors in the different countries, it makes the job a little easier.
And such diversity within those regions as well, and the different levels of potential, which I'm really keen to get into as well. But let's just start with a quick broad stroke just to settle us in. So as of yet, we know that there are these net zero commitments from countries and from companies as well, and they're certainly to be lauded, but as yet there are a few concrete pathways as to how to get there. And when it starts getting to the conversation about scope 3, I think everybody's brain gets incredibly muddled, and it's something that we're going to have to get to, address in more detail at some point. And the same with carbon pricing. Of course, we've got far more pricing initiatives now. We've got 64 worldwide, according to the World Bank now, versus 2 in 1990. So it's all heading in the right direction. But this total transformation of key economic systems is needed to make these net zero targets a reality. From your perspective, because we recently had the IPCC report, the IEA's net zero report. From your perspective, how are we doing? Are you confident that there's enough walk following the talk, as it were?
Well, as everybody has seen from the IPCC climate change report that was just recently, released, we're not there. And we're not going to reach there by 2050 with our net zero commitments in place. And, we headed already past the North Star of a 3 degrees Celsius, temperature increase or beyond. And this should be, and these are really based on evidence-based information. So the thing, that we need to start looking at is to say, how can we make those net zero commitments actionable in the next 9 years for us to really change our course of direction and to start reaching the North Star of the 2 degrees, projection.
That's an incredibly eloquent way to say it. I like that a lot. Are you confident that enough can be done within those 9 years? It would require an astonishing surge in efforts.
No, very rightfully so. I think you touched on it initially in your question. You said from 1990 to present, we have been discussing it based on policy, advocacy, and just discussions around us. It took us that long to really discuss it. We cannot take much time, to really discuss our commitments and digest it into strategies and visions. It needs actions, and that entails us working from a collaborative perspective, engaging with multi-stakeholder organizations, public-private partnerships, to really propel development into climate action focus areas for us in the next 9 years, basically.
Because Engie, of course, you have your net zero carbon target by 2045. You've repositioned the whole company for long-term sustainable growth and accelerating renewables, as the tagline goes. Internally, there's been a huge switch around, and renewable targets as well have certainly intensified in terms of capacity, reaching 32 gigawatts of low carbon distributed energy infrastructure by 2025. That's near-term targets.
Absolutely. I think, as Engie, in terms of our total transformation in line with our net zero target of 2045, which was just recently announced, and actually brought down a little stricter from 2050, was because of this. We as an organization, again, committed to fighting and tackling climate change and starting today. At the end of the day, we do have different milestones. We do have milestones for 2025, and our 2030 science-based targets is an instrumental focus area for us to have reached those actionable levels and achievements. So even though our North Star is 2045, we have midterm goals to be achieved by 2030.
As well, just going back to that scope that I mentioned at the very beginning, you cover Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and in terms of population, that's probably well over a third of the global population in those areas that you oversee as part of your role. What kind of challenges are you seeing when it comes to how different nations within those regions, regardless of the region themselves, just nations within them as well, how you're managing the diversity and how one nation may have great infrastructure, another nation is stronger on the regulatory side, another nation has great talent but it can't be leveraged appropriately, another's willing to have investors move in, but the policy framework's just not there. So there's these pieces of the puzzle. What's the best way to get around that so that there's, like you say, more of the circularity impact?
Well, firstly, I think, we celebrate our diversity. And I think the diversity in just that is so powerful because it can leverage on different skills, different knowledges, different experience, different innovation, different ideas. So really, we use that as an advantage. And we try to localize our actions that become more meaningful. So, we use regional context as the playing field of how we conduct business. And which is really important because that then drives the focus of localizing our ESG requirements, supporting, growers, be it, your green economies, green infrastructure, locally or regionally. So really, we use that to our advantage, and we try to, position ourselves that then support kind of country goals, commitments that become NG's kind of footprint of where we are.
I'm glad you mentioned ESG there, because global assets are on track to exceed $53 trillion by 2025. And this is recent stats from Bloomberg, NEF, New Energy Finance, representing more than a third of the $140.5 trillion in projected total assets under management. That's humongous, and that was certainly not the story a couple of years ago, even 18 months ago. If we're looking ahead to the next year, where do you see that narrative going? How do you see things evolving in the ESG world, in the areas that you cover?
Look, ESG has always been there, and I think from an investor perspective, it's really come up to focus to really for investors as a reassurance mechanism, so that projects that they're investing in are sustainable, has its longevity, etc. But from an investor perspective, you got to understand that they're looking at from projects that they're investing in. But as an organization or investors into projects, you have to really localize it, because at the end of the day, if you don't localize your business, it takes away from the project itself, it takes away from the country you're investing in, and you become somewhat of a silo effect when it comes to organizations delivering it. So ultimately, your ESG elements must complement your sustainable development goals of that country. They should work in parallel, because at the end of the day, they one in the same. Ultimately, your ESG is streamlined to meet investors and your clients' requirements, whilst the SDGs are really there supporting global issues. So really, if you localize and treat those ESG requirements within a country framework and support the needs of a country, I think it's imperative to propel those countries and at the same time resolve global issues.
And I'm glad you mentioned that point on circularity as well, that it's just so pivotal to making sustainability a success, because I don't hear that as often as I would hope to with organizations, not NG size all the time, but other organizations and part of their plans, that the world of a circular economy still in some spheres is disconnected from the idea of sustainability. They're two parallel paths working alongside each other rather than really being intertwined within one another. Do you see that? Do you see that there might be a great need for more education about what a circular economy means and the absolute detail that goes into it, rather than it just being about addressing waste through recycling, but the whole picture of what a circular economy really means?
Oh, definitely. And I think, more awareness is never enough. The thing about awareness and education around circularity is that how does it impact me? How do I need to change? So, looking at circularity from a general context, most organizations tend to shy away because it doesn't really, they don't fit into the context or the governance of what is being discussed. But, really working from a sustainability role, and I think, your sustainability roles really need to be integrated into the business, that then helps business, individuals be involved in the circularity. They may not really understand the concept of it, but from just understanding, their products and services, it helps them then saying, okay, fine, what is our footprint? How are we sourcing it? Where are we sourcing it? Can it be sourced locally? And what are the alternatives available? And the big thing about circularity, and I think why people shy away from it, is that the bad perception is that if we change to cleaner, greener kind of products and services, it's going to cost too much. So I think, having certain roles in the business will try to kind of break those barriers that, green, clean, or sustainable does not always mean more expensive. So I think, it definitely needs more work when it comes to awareness and education.
There's still that fear, isn't it, that moving away from this linear structure means that those, especially producers, are going to be left out in the cold. And for them, there's such an overhaul of their business to make sure that they're integrated into that process, and that they're part of that new supply chain, that more holistic circular supply chain. And perhaps with all the noise and the stresses that come with just being sustainable in the first place and setting ambitious goals, perhaps right now for some it's just a step too far. Is that part of it, do you think?
Absolutely. And as I said, at the end of the day, it is, having individuals saying, what are the alternatives? How can I look at the alternatives? How can, it doesn't mean the linear model is going to be taken away. It's how you are, adapting that linear model in a more circular approach that kind of prevents and somewhat monetizes some of your waste streams, and it's not only about waste streams that are at the end of your life cycle, but it's really about, how can we monetize and see value in it? And I think it's about a pitch as well to the right internal stakeholders and your investors, because at the end of the day, we have to be, true to ourselves and say, we need businesses to run. We need businesses to be financially viable. So what is the financial pitch that supports the sustainability kind of, governance of people, planet, and profit? That then pushes the circularity conversations at the right tables, looking at different areas and components of the business. And remember, as they always say, Rome wasn't built in a day. But even if organizations start taking one element of their product and start, really detailing it from a life cycle approach, and then start saying, okay, this is how I can adapt, and this is where I need to start making changes. And I think that has to be the starting point. And I think we're kind of shying away from it because we don't necessarily want to do it, or we think it's too expensive. So
I'm really glad you brought it up, because for me, that's one of the weakest areas in sustainability at the moment, in terms of that you summed it up beautifully, that financial pitch for making circular approaches work. And that, to me, is an area that just isn't getting the level of focus that it needs. And these goals are being set, which is, as I said, it's laudable, great, we're on the right track. Rome certainly was not built in a day, but without more financial incentives for circularity and more education as well, to me, that these broader goals of sustainability just won't be able to get off the ground. So I'm really glad that you picked that up, picked it up and went into that as well. 𝗠🂫, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and we've only really just started on the circular economy. There's so much to say. So I hope you'll join us again soon, and that we'll be able to pick up on this. And by then, the pace of change is so great. By then, it'll be a whole fresh conversation, hopefully.
Oh, absolutely. And hopefully the next time that we do have this conversation, we would, have much greater discussions on different actions that organizations have already taken from, just being in 2021 IPC report that was released. So I think we can get there, but it's, the right discussions at the right, tables that needs to happen.
Absolutely, and I was reassured by the shock levels at the report, because of course a lot of those things have been stated in the report have been mentioned for years, decades, even on a much more muted level, less confidence and less broader support around it. But now it's really got such a strong voice, and for the first time in 15 years that I've been covering this, for a report to come out and absolutely dominate news headlines, dominate opinion polls, dominate consumer polls as well, not just on a government and policy level, but all the way through the chain. To have friends mention it to me who are not part of our world, it's a huge step change, and perhaps we need a few more of those reports to get things going a little faster as well.
Absolutely. But thank you, Michelle. Thank you to Gulf Intelligence for creating the awareness and the importance around actions around climate change.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate that, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.